Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our interview with Mr. Paul Lancione, who is the federal NDP candidate in our riding. Mr. Lancione, thank you for agreeing to join us.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate anybody who's willing to give me a platform, and I think it's important as somebody who's running to represent the people of my riding that the people of my riding know that I'm willing to sit down and have these kinds of conversations, because I think it's important to be held to account, and that's obviously not the sole purpose of the media, but it's one of the many purposes of the free press in this country.
Well, and I'm hoping to give you an opportunity to speak about your party platform in particular. Well, that's what this is an opportunity for you to speak about your party platform and how, even though we talk about national issues, how you see the NDP's platform working in Leeds and Grenville. So central to the messaging that your leaders put forward is the issue of EI reform. So what implications, how do you see that actually changing things in Leeds and Grenville?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, and I've spoken at the door with many workers from the manufacturing sector, and we are a hub of manufacturing in Leeds-Grenville-Thousand Islands. I'm thinking Northern Cables, 3M, we have the Invista plant, and just so many more to even name. And everybody is concerned about the prospect of a unprecedented trade war with our closest neighbor and ally. And we have our spits and spats with the US. No two countries have perfect relations, but our sovereignty as a nation is being questioned, and Donald Trump has said that he is looking to take over our country using economic force. So he's going to be attacking our workers, he's going to be attacking our industries, and as a border region, this is going to impact us especially hard. And so I think that a lot of workers, at least the ones that I've spoken to, are worried about whether or not they're going to have jobs in the coming months. And so it's important that workers are able to access EI. We all pay into these services, and so workers should be able to access them, especially if we're facing the prospect of this trade war. And we need to make sure that EI is enough for workers to actually live off of, because otherwise we're already facing a housing crisis. We're already facing a cost of living crisis. So if workers are already struggling to afford groceries and workers are already struggling to pay their rent, then all of these issues are just going to be exacerbated by the tariffs. And so I think it's important that in this time we support our industries, but we also make sure that individual workers are supported. So by making sure that we have strong EI reform, we're going to ensure that workers have money to keep themselves in their homes and pay their bills.
And in practical terms, what does that reform actually mean?
Yeah, so it means...
Nuts and bolts.
Yeah, absolutely. So it means making, again, like I said, making sure that EI is actually, EI is actually enough to support yourself, because right now, I'm not sure what the exact payments are off the top of my head, but they're definitely not enough to support a family off of. And so if EI is going to be something that replaces a person's wages, it needs to be substantial, and it also means making sure that it's easy to access for people when these layoffs are going to affect, you know, we're facing the prospect of mass layoffs, so we need to make sure that the many people who are going to be laid off are able to access these services.
To flip the question, originally the NDP had a much larger rural component than it seems to these days in its representation at various levels of government. And when we talk about EI and we talk about workers, generally it's for employees. Agriculture is a huge element of the economy of our riding, Lanark, Leeds-Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes. And most agricultural workers are self-employed, not eligible for EI as a consequence.
Absolutely.
Because they own, but that doesn't mean that the same economic circumstances don't impact them. So how does your party see supporting agriculture in a time of tariffs?
Absolutely. And
Tough question, I get it.
No, I completely understand, and if I'm running to represent these agricultural workers, I want them to understand that we as the NDP are on their side. We need farmers. Farmers are absolutely essential to our economy, and I think that successive governments have really failed agricultural workers in many ways. And so one of the components of our EI reforms is expanding the base of people who are able to access EI. So
Right.
we would be trying to make sure that these agricultural workers are able to access EI.
Right. And many of those workers are actually owners as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this touches on the second part of the work security, which is actually employment security. What does your party platform say about how you plan to support Canadian industry to continue to operate in a time of tariffs?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the big things is making sure that no manufacturing equipment leaves the country, because if all of these American companies are pulling out of the country and they try to take their equipment with them, then how are we supposed to produce the products that we need in this time? We're not going to be able to. So we're going to be making sure that industrial equipment stays in the country. And I think in the case of Leeds-Grenville-Thousand Islands-Rideau lakes, one really growing industry that will in the long term be absolutely crucial is the green energy sector. The world is moving towards a green economy. Demand for fossil fuels and for carbon is plummeting, and we have a real opportunity in our riding to become leaders in the green energy sector. We already have plenty of startups that are, we have solar farms and such, and we have, hydrocarbons. We have many startups that are in the riding that are looking to get hydrocarbon facilities going. These are going to be the industries of the future, and we don't need to keep subsidizing the fossil fuel industry just to prop up the economy of one province. That's not going to do much for the people here. And I know there's talk from all the major parties about pipelines, but we haven't really paid off the last pipeline that we built. Any new pipeline that we build is going to take potentially 10, 20 years, and by then the global economy will have detransitioned from carbon anyways. So we have a real opportunity to turn our riding into a real manufacturing hub of these green energy solutions. And so I think investing in green energy, making sure that industries are protected and that no equipment leaves the country, and then making sure that the individual workers are protected, because if workers can't afford to pay their bills, then all of a sudden their housing is in question, and how can you expect workers to be productive if the cost of living just skyrockets and then they're not able to afford the rent? That's going to be a huge productivity lag.
So you frame a transition, and it's not in our writing, so we won't go into detail, but you frame a transition from a petroleum-based economy to a more green economy. And I think from a larger perspective, the question is going to be, what would the NDP's policies look like to provide quality of life and living income equivalents for people who are now transitioning out of the petroleum industry? But we're going to slip to another question. Housing affordability is something that's in everybody's platform. How does the NDP platform suggest you intend to render housing more affordable? And more importantly, because housing affordability is just one part of cost of living.
Absolutely.
How does the NDP see reducing the cost of living for Canadians?
Yeah, so regarding housing, I mean, housing has been on the top of people's minds for decades, and the cost of living and housing. I remember when Trudeau was first running, this was the era where I personally was having my political awakening.
This is Justin Trudeau.
Justin Trudeau, the younger, yeah. Yeah, obviously, I wasn't around when the senior was
I remember
there.
senior, so I've just, and our audience is across the board, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the issues, cost of living and housing in particular, these are issues that people were talking about 10 years ago before Trudeau was elected. These are issues that we've been facing for decades, and that successive governments have just, thrown to the wayside for specifically corporate profits, because right now we're seeing a lot of the wealthiest Canadians making more money than they've ever made before. There's so much wealth in this country. We're one of the richest countries in the world, and obviously we're struggling right now, but every country in the world is struggling right now. But to get back to your question, because I'm getting a little bit sidetracked here.
It's your time.
Of course. So with housing specifically, one of the things that we're going to be doing is instituting rent control. So making sure that these new builds are actually affordable, because so many of the new housing developments that are being built right now, the rent is just outrageous. And we are currently living in one of the areas of Ontario that still has relatively affordable housing. And so if we want to keep it that way, we need to make sure that we have rent control. We need to make sure that first-time home buyers are able to access low interest rate loans, which are things that we do with developers anyways. And so why shouldn't we give that benefit to the taxpayers who pay an enormous tax burden compared to a lot of the richest Canadians? So
does any part of your platform involve incentivizing or requiring builders to build housing within a specific price point?
Yeah, absolutely. That is part of our platform. Although I am going to be honest with you, there are so many aspects of our platform that this is one aspect of our platform that I personally haven't fully explored yet and dove into. Okay. I know that it is part of our platform, and we're going to be opening up as much federal land as possible to make sure that we're building new housing developments. And I'm sorry, I can't answer that specific question.
But the point you've made about making federal land available has been central to your leaders' messaging as well.
Absolutely, and I think it's something that all the different parties' leaders are really bringing up. I know that Pierre wants to sell off a lot of. I'm sorry, I know that you say you don't want to talk too much about the other parties.
I'm actually tracking the clock, because what I'm going to say is you should summarize. You had a closing statement, and now would be the time to launch with that. I don't want to be rude, but
of course, I understand.
Your choice.
So, friends, neighbors, fellow voters. As a country, we currently face many crises. The cost of living rises, home ownership is becoming unattainable, and our sovereignty is being questioned by our closest neighbor and ally. At a time when our industries are under attack, we need to ensure that all Canadians are supported, not just the wealthiest few. The Liberals and Conservatives have failed to address the growing divide between the richest and poorest Canadians. Since the 80s, the wealth of the top 1% of Canadians has grown 6 times more than the bottom 50%. The cost of living has increased far faster for that same bottom 50%. Clearly, our government has chosen to abandon working and middle classes, and they did long before the Trudeau years. He campaigned on a promise to fix these problems and to reform our electoral system, our justice system, and our social services, but he only passed progressive legislation when forced by the NDP. Carney, as a senior Trudeau advisor, will continue the Liberal tradition of campaigning as a progressive, but governing as a Conservative. The Conservatives believe that the solution here is to cut unnecessary spending. However, we've seen how that works in practice. During their last government, they cut 1,100 border service agents, and they cut the RCMP budget by $600 million, making our country less safe, and that's just scratching the surface. They cut old age security, they've gutted social programs and healthcare. Pierre has promised to make even more cuts, and he plans on increasing the retirement age from 65 to 67, making working Canadians work even longer. We, the NDP, are the only party that have a record of actually working for Canadians, not just those with a direct line to Parliament. Our party was founded as a coalition of farmers and unions across Canada. At a time when workers' rights and collective bargaining are under attack, we need the NDP more than ever to face Trump's tariffs. We will use our voice in Parliament to increase GIS and disability, cut sales tax on many basic items, enhance pharmacare and dental care, and mobilize government agencies to rapidly build affordable housing. If we come together and make sure all Canadians are taken care of during these difficult times, then we can achieve anything. Once again, I'm Paul Lancione, and I'm your NDP candidate for Leeds-Grenville-Thousand Islands-Rideau Lakes. If you'd like to learn more, you can go to paullancione.ndp.ca. Thank you.
Mr. Lancione, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
I wish you safe travels during the campaign, sir.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure chatting.
Thank you very much.